Hello everyone, welcome back to another discussion video. Earlier this week while scrolling Twitter, I saw Hens posted a little tweet that was labeled, "Who is the strongest killer?" A little poll between Chucky and the Unknown. The final results with over 8,763 votes came to a 54.7% in the Unknown's favor versus 45.3% in Chucky's favor. If you know me, of course, I did end up voting for the Unknown. But later, after kind of thinking about things more and reading some of the comments, I understood it's probably better that I don't just think about this from my own gameplay perspective, but rather the community as a whole. And I know with many players that I have discussed this kind of thing with before, most people usually struggle with, UVX shots, with how punishing it can be for just simply missing one. And not to mention how punishing it can feel to go against 4 good Survivor players. It's pretty interesting to read through a lot of the comments and kind of get a lot of the back and forth out of it, so I figured, hey, you know what, why not weigh on it a little bit myself too? Now, the first thing that comes to my mind when I've been thinking about this back and forth debate is mostly just where people have been placing Chucky versus Unknown in most of their character tier lists. So I went to YouTube to check out recent killer tier lists that were uploaded to see where people placed each killer. One of the first recommended lists I found was from Namedi TV that put Unknown at A tier and Chucky at C tier. Otofu's killer tier list that came out during the Freddy buff patch has Unknown at a high A- tier, and Chucky at a low A- tier. Hotstarva's killer tier list made by the 8.4 patch has Unknown at A-, very low A- by the way, and Chucky at a lower C tier. And Scott Junn's killer tier list that was made around the Ghouls release time has Unknown at B tier, and Chucky at a mid to low B tier. The primary trend you probably are all noticing throughout all these tier lists I mentioned here is every single one places the Unknown above Chucky every single time. Sometimes it's a very close race between them, but other times it's a massive significant difference. A lot of the negative stigmas towards Chucky has mostly come from the nerfs that he received recently of slowing down his movement speed. Well, specifically the movement speed during his power. And listening through each one of these videos as to why people thought that the Unknown was an A-tier killer, most usually went off the idea that the killer has a lot of map pressure due to their hallucinations, and also has high snowball potential. While all these points together are true, do make the killer a pretty strong killer, it was primarily Tofu that I listened to discuss the main issues that the Unknown also has, which also stems into the more general player base of the Unknown as well. While playing the Unknown successfully and nailing shot after shot can absolutely create an easy snowball game for an easy victory, that's not always going to be every single game you play with this character. The amount of punishment that you can receive just from either missing one shot, let alone missing multiple after multiple shots, especially when you're playing against smart players that know how to dodge your shots, can absolutely be devastating. Whereas if we compare UVX to Chucky's power, I feel as though Chucky's power can be much user-friendly to use, as well as a much more accessible thing to actually hit good or bad players with. Both powers, of course, having their nuances and little techs and things to learn with them, of course, to kind of really set the good players from the great players. But even so, if we were to compare both, I feel as though Chucky's does take the edge for a little bit more of an accessible power, as well as a less punishing power for missing. A lot of the strength from both powers, of course, also comes from general killer knowledge and knowing when and when not to use said powers. Neither power, especially Chucky's, is worth just throwing out there and having a useless power on cooldown constantly, not getting any value. While I would also recommend that it is best to take as many shots as you can with the Unknown, it's also when it comes to trying to reapply a shot after you've hit the first one, because nothing wastes more time than having to apply a shot, then trying to hit again, missing, and then you just have a healthy person running away when you could have just M1'd them instead. And this kind of situation is what leads into a lot of what I would believe is the frustration and part of the reasons as to why Unknown has a smaller pick rate compared to Chucky. As I've discussed in my Unknown guide video, as well as other previous discussion videos about the Unknown, involving the weakened status, it takes 10 seconds for a survivor to remove the status, while UVX also has a 7-second cooldown, as well as a charge time of 1 second, which doing our quick maths is 8 seconds out of that 10 seconds total. Meaning while playing as the Unknown, you're pressured with only a 2-second timer on average against good players to nail a perfect follow-up shot. And if you're against a smart player who's probably going to be trying to break a lot of line of sight and, just a lot of just blockers in general, you're not going to be having a good time, and most times out of 10, as well as using the buffer that they get as well, that's 1.25 seconds, chances are, against a smart player, you're not going to be getting a follow-up shot most time. That's of course not to say that this is inevitable every single time, but it will be a common thing against the really smart players. While I would say in a chase against an average player, you might have more of a 50-50 coin flip or maybe a 70-30 depending on the circumstances. Against smart players overall though, I would put the coin flip ratio more at a 25 to maybe 30% ratio on the killer side and more of a favor of the survivor side. Whereas if we're to compare this to a really good Chucky player, usually against really good players, they've said more often that it's going to be a 50-50 coin flip, and whereas more average players, a 70-30 in Chucky's favor. Another important part about Chucky that doesn't really get talked about as much as well is his third-person camera is also like a secondary power as well. I see a lot of really smart Chucky players taking advantage of the third-person camera to mind game during chase, scoring a lot of hits that they normally wouldn't that pretty much any other killer really couldn't get, maybe besides Dracula with his third-person camera as well. Listening to some of the other tier lists, when I was listening to reasons as to why Unknown was put in the A tier a lot of the time, some people just didn't really have any reasons for it. They just said, hey, Unknown, great killer, goes right in the A tier. Hallucinations, those are cool. Yep, ranged attack, put it in the A tier. And again, while mentioning that a lot of these points would equal a typical A tier killer or even a high B tier killer, I just don't feel as though these reasonings really speak upon the vast majority of the player base itself. I checked the Nightlight website that has pick rates and kill rates for different killers, which I do know you can't fully argue is the most accurate, but it's kind of the only thing we have to go off of, unfortunately, minus when behavior actually releases stats. As of recording this video, Chucky is sitting at the 14th most played killer at a 2.46% pick rate and a kill rate of 53.14%, whereas the Unknown is currently sitting in 25th place at a 1.83% pick rate and a 54.14% kill rate. Now, a reason I bring up the pick rate is to show more or less how many people are really playing each killer, where I feel as though with the bigger pick rate, I mean a significantly bigger boost on the actual rankings themselves, being 14 compared to 25th, Chucky on a larger scale has a lot more ranging from casual to more competitive players playing them, at all different high or low rank, where I feel as though the Unknown may have a bit of a more lesser spread player base, more sitting right in the middle, not really too high, not really too low on the ranks, just comfortable middle, on average anyways. While looking at both kill stats, Unknown has a 6% higher kill rate at 4K, while Chucky has a 5% higher kill rate at 3Ks and a 3% higher kill rate at 2Ks, while the Unknown also has a 1% higher rate on both 1Ks and no Ks. Looking at these stats as a whole, it seems as though Unknown either is going to really win the game or is just going to straight up lose the game. Whereas with Chucky, you're going to have a nice even middle ground between being either winning or just a slight tie. Taking all of what we've talked about in mind and put it together as a whole, this has put me at the point where I believe that Chucky is actually stronger than the Unknown. The biggest reason, again, what I would say is that Chucky is just coming out on top as being way more consistent than the Unknown has been, well, ever really. Unknown has kind of been trapped in this spot for a while where there is some buffs that really need to come into play that really bring in more of a player base to this character. As it stands right now, the character's power is just way too punishing simply by missing one shot, let alone, again, consistently missing shots over and over again. There are, however, some buffs that my friend Revium discussed about very briefly on Twitter that I would say also would be stuff that would really truly help the killer a lot. Quoting Rev's reply directly from this tweet, he said, "Almost every single Unknown enthusiast under the sun has agreed with me that 4.4 MS Unknown with more rewarding tweaks to the UVX would be a worthy trade-off. I hope that the devs see this desire and capitalize on it, as this killer is extremely fun, but the power falls off against better survivors." I 100% agree with this statement, that if you were to slow the movement speed of this killer down and buff the numbers on this power, it would make a significant difference. And I'm talking very easy tweaks. Taking that 10% weaken timer, buffing it up to a 12-second timer, taking the UVX timer of 7 seconds to even just dropping it a single second, make a huge difference. Even reducing the 1 second charge time to like 0.75 or even 0.5 seconds, depending on what seems more fair at the time with all the other number tweaks. I could easily see the pick rate of this killer going up if the power was less frustrating to use, and doing these number tweaks would definitely do so. Because unfortunately, as it stands right now, most people usually just end up being M1 Andys, and using their teleports with their hallucinations, which, sure, you know, whatever gets the job done at the end of the day, but is it really that fun? Is it going to be really that consistent? No. I don't think reducing yourself down to an M1 killer is really the way to go, because if you're going to go for that, you might as well play as any other M1 killer. Or hell, at that point, just play Chucky. At least he's more consistent. The bottom line of it all is I feel like there's been this misconception that the Unknown is this high A+ tier killer, and I mean, I too have felt this way for a long time, though I myself have been basing it more off just my own personal gameplay and my own personal experiences, not really necessarily the community as a whole, where that's how it really should be placed when we're looking at a tier list that really applies to everyone. I would, however, still agree though that I think the Unknown is still at a solid B tier, but if they were to receive any tweaks and buffs that I would say they would definitely need to really help the numbers and help just the general player base as a whole, they definitely, no doubt, could be a high A+ tier like we all believe they have been. As for Chucky, I would also put him at a high B tier as well, maybe a little bit higher than the Unknown, but not by too much though. I still do feel like they are pretty close in power, but I would say just due to the consistency and less frustrations that Chucky has, that I would put Chucky just slightly higher. As some could also argue that Chucky does a similar thing that Nurse does as well, but just not quite as good. Due to both being proficient on downing survivors quickly, but both have a lack of mobility to balance themselves out. With all that said, those are my thoughts on this debate. I hope you guys enjoyed watching, listening to my little rambles, and you know, if you agree, you disagree, you know, leave a comment below, let me know what you think. I definitely know the comments may be a little bit back and forth, just as they were on Twitter, but hey, you know what? These kind of debates can always be fun too. Thank you so much for watching. Subscribe if you haven't already. Check me out over on the Twitch channel, twitch.tv/honestpanda. We're live 5 days a week, Monday to Friday, 7 PM Eastern to whenever we end. Playing lots and lots of DBD, lots of Unknown especially, so if you haven't checked out all of the channels, please go do so. Until the next one, I hope you have a safe and happy day, and I'll see you all soon. Bye-bye.